The moment I saw the golf cart brigade rolling down my gravel driveway like they were prepping for a sting operation, I knew something was off. 5 of them, matching polos, clipboards. And at the front, standing like she was about to serve a search warrant on national television, was Francine Matlock, Vice President of the Pine Heights HOA and self-declared Property Standards Enforcer. I was elbow-deep in a busted irrigation pipe when I heard her yell, "Jericho! Step away from that pipe. We are conducting an official inspection." I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked up. "Inspection of what?" "Of your so-called farm," she snapped, using air quotes like she was allergic to the word. "You're in violation of multiple HOA codes regarding livestock, unauthorized outbuildings," and she paused to read from her clipboard, "non-compliant fencing materials." I almost laughed. My place, a 5-acre lot on the edge of the HOA's jurisdiction, had been in my family for 3 generations. My granddad built the barn. My mom grew up feeding chickens here. But ever since the HOA expanded its footprint and annexed the edge lots 2 years ago, they'd been trying to pretend my property was just another manicured lawn with a pink mailbox. Francine waved her arm like she was leading a SWAT team. "Begin the sweep." One of her lackeys started taking pictures of my chicken coop. Another poked at my raised vegetable beds with a ruler. A third opened my barn door without even asking. "You break anything in there, Francine, and I swear this is HOA business, Jericho," she said, cutting me off. "You've ignored citations, refused to attend meetings, and your goats are a public nuisance." "Goats," I frowned. "You mean the therapy goats I let the local school use every other week? They are not HOA-approved animals," she snapped. "This is your final warning." Now, here's the thing, I'd been waiting for this. I knew Francine was going to try something big. She'd been circling me for weeks, citing me for imaginary violations like excessive clucking and unauthorized scarecrow placement. So I called in a favor. And just as Francine began snapping photos of my compost bin like it was a meth lab, a white county truck rolled up behind her little parade. Out stepped County Code Inspector Ramon Delgado, clipboard in hand, county seal on his shirt. Francine turned, her lips already curling. "Excuse me, this is an HOA matter." Ramon didn't even glance at her. "Mr. Jericho Mays," he asked. I nodded. "That's me. Got your call. Figured I'd swing by during your inspection." Francine's eyes narrowed. "You're interfering in a private HOA enforcement action." He gave her the driest look I've ever seen. "No, ma'am, you're trespassing on private property. And unless you've got a court order or a sheriff's deputy, you're not enforcing anything." Francine's jaw went rigid. "I have HOA authority." Ramon flipped a page on his clipboard. "And I have county jurisdiction. This land is zoned agricultural residential. All structures are code compliant, livestock is permitted, and fencing is well within acceptable variance." "You're out of your lane," she sputtered. But the bylaws don't override county law," he said. That's when one of her clipboard warriors, some guy with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset, tried to quietly sneak off my property through the back fence. Ramon saw him. "Sir, step back over here. You entered a locked barn without permission." The guy froze. Now Francine was sweating. "We have authority." Ramon pulled out his phone. "Then you won't mind if I get the sheriff down here to sort this out." I leaned against the fence post, arms crossed, watching the color drain from Francine's face. "You brought fake cops to raid my property," I said. "And you didn't expect someone with real authority to show up." Francine didn't answer, but her eye twitched. And that was enough for me to know this was only the beginning. The HOA's retreat was awkward. 5 polo-clad trespassers trudging back to their golf carts under the watchful eye of a county inspector, who'd made it abundantly clear they were lucky not to be in handcuffs. Francine didn't say another word. She just glared at me like I'd stolen her crown and threw it in the compost pile. Ramon waited until they were halfway down the drive before turning to me. "They've pulled this kind of stunt before," he said. "Usually with folks who don't know what rights they still have." I nodded toward the barn. They opened that door without so much as knocking. You think that's enough for criminal trespass? He pulled a small notepad from his back pocket and jotted something down. Already sent a message to the sheriff's office. If you're willing to press charges, we can take it from there. I didn't answer immediately. My mind was already working through the next steps. This wasn't just some overzealous neighbor griping about lawn height. This was organized, calculated. She showed up with documents, camera crews, and muscle. This wasn't their first attempt, but it was definitely their boldest. Ramon glanced at my fencing. You know they've got a new member on the HOA board, some developer out of state. Bought 3 lots near the woods and started showing up at meetings last month. He's been pushing for land use reviews at the edge properties. Trying to force people out, I asked, or pressure them into selling, he said. That tracked. My land straddled what had recently become some of the most valuable real estate in the area. 5 acres with water access, no easement issues, and a history of no chemical use prime territory for someone looking to build overpriced homes with fake shutters and a community dog park. I walked Ramon to his truck, and before he left, he handed me a manila envelope. Official county zoning maps, he explained, and a copy of your parcel's grandfathered permissions. Keep them close. If they try this again, you'll want hard proof in hand. As he drove off, I noticed someone standing behind the oak tree near the mailbox. It was Nolan, my neighbor from 3 lots down, Vietnam vet, and the only guy on the block who still sharpened his own mower blades. He stepped out, arms crossed. They hit you too, I nodded. Today was a show, he exhaled sharply. Last week they came by my place saying my flagpole was too tall, said it violated the skyline integrity clause. I told them it was the same pole I used to raise the colors back in Nam. They didn't care. I motioned toward the house. You want coffee? He followed me in, boots leaving dusty prints on the floor. As I poured us 2 mugs, he leaned close. They've been going after anyone who doesn't fit the vision plan. That's what Francine called it when she tried to get me to sign some kind of property modification agreement. I raised an eyebrow. Vision plan? She said it was a roadmap for neighborhood cohesion, wanted me to replace my wood siding with faux stone, said it would elevate the aesthetics. I told her I'd elevate her clipboard into the creek if she came back. I laughed, but it didn't feel funny. What they were doing wasn't just harassment. It was a coordinated campaign to sanitize the neighborhood, and I wasn't about to let them steamroll my history for the sake of higher property values. Later that night, I pulled out the external drive I kept locked in the back of my gun safe, the one that recorded all 4 of my security cameras. I queued up the footage from earlier. There they were, clear as daylight. Francine and her clipboard brigade entering the barn, taking unauthorized photos and rifling through my feed bins. I clipped the footage, labeled it, and copied it onto 3 separate USB sticks. The next morning, I drove into town and walked straight into the sheriff's office. Deputy Carla Hines was behind the desk, flipping through a folder. She looked up as I approached. Jericho, she said, heard about your surprise inspection. I handed her the USB, got it all on video. Trespassing, illegal search, possible property tampering. County inspector was on site. He's already filed a report. She plugged the drive into her desktop and skimmed through the footage. Her face hardened. This isn't just trespassing. That's criminal misrepresentation of authority. If they were impersonating enforcement, they're looking at multiple charges. I leaned on the counter. They had HOA badges with them, metal ones. Looked like deputy shields, just with Pine Heights property control etched into the top. She paused the video. You're kidding. I wish. She reached for the phone on her desk. I'm calling the DA. By the time I got back home, word had already spread. A few neighbors were clustered at the end of my drive, whispering and glancing toward my barn. I parked and stepped out. Jasmine, who ran the daycare 2 houses over, approached first. They told us you were hiding unlicensed animals, she said. Said they had video proof. Francine went door to door the night before last. I felt my jaw tighten. They're spreading lies now. Nolan appeared behind her. They're trying to poison the well before the truth gets out. I led them both into the house, booted up my laptop, and played the footage I'd given the sheriff. When Francine was caught on tape opening the barn door and barking orders like she was leading a raid on a drug den, Jasmine gasped. "She told me you were threatening people with dogs." "Therapy goats," I said, "with bells on their collars." That night, I printed a dozen flyers and stapled them to every telephone pole from the entrance gate to the mail kiosk. Each one had a still frame from the video, the date and time stamp, and a simple line underneath: "Know your neighbors. Know your rights." By the following Wednesday, the sheriff's department had opened an investigation into the HOA's use of fake enforcement badges. The county attorney issued a cease and desist letter to the board, and Francine was subpoenaed for a deposition. But the real blow came when the news van rolled up outside my gate. Channel 7's local reporter, Kendra Lyle, knocked on my door with a cameraman in tow. She'd gotten wind of the footage and wanted to run a segment on abuse of power in suburban HOAs. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other people," she explained as I showed her the footage. "We've had similar reports from other neighborhoods, but no one's ever caught them on camera like this." I gave her everything: the footage, the zoning documents, the flyers, the names of 5 neighbors they'd tried to intimidate. By the time the segment aired, Pine Heights looked like a gated community run by mall cops on a power trip. Francine tried to fire off a rebuttal. Claimed the footage was doctored, that I'd forced her onto the property, that her enforcement team was acting in good faith. But her own board wasn't buying it. The developer who joined the HOA recently, turns out he had a lot riding on public perception. A scandal like this wasn't good for business. That Friday I got a letter in the mail, certified, from the HOA. It read, "Effective immediately, Francine Matlock is suspended pending the outcome of ongoing investigations. The board will be reviewing all enforcement procedures for compliance with local, state, and federal law." I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was still too much to unravel. But I did go out to the barn that night, sat on the hay bale next to the goats, and let out a long breath. The storm had passed for now, but the air still crackled with tension because people like Francine didn't back down. They regrouped. They rebranded, so I started preparing for the next move. Because the only thing worse than someone knocking on your door with a clipboard is someone who stops knocking entirely. 2 days after the news segment aired, a black SUV with tinted windows coasted past my front gate, paused just long enough to angle a dashcam toward my barn, and then disappeared up the hill. It was subtle, but not subtle enough to miss. They were watching. Not the HOA board this time, someone with more to lose. That same morning, I found a letter stuffed under my windshield wiper. No envelope, no return address. Just a folded sheet of printer paper with one typed sentence: "Back out or your livestock disappears." I stared at the note for a long time before folding it neatly and walking it inside. I didn't call the sheriff right away, not because I wasn't taking it seriously, but because I'd already installed 4 additional cameras around the property, 2 of which had clear views of the road and my driveway. The footage confirmed what I suspected. The SUV had no plates. I called Ramon again, this time on his personal line. He answered on the second ring. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call," he said. "I got a threat," I told him. "Anonymous. Something about my livestock." He paused. "You think it's Francine?" "No, she's too arrogant to hide behind notes." "This feels like someone trying to scare me into silence." "All right," he said. "Don't touch anything else they left. I'll come out with a deputy." Within an hour, a plainclothes investigator named Troy Harland showed up with a handheld scanner and a kit bag. He dusted the paper for prints, bagged it, and started asking questions I hadn't expected. "Have you had any recent offers to sell the property?" he asked. "About a month ago," I said. "Some guy named Ethan Langford. Claimed he was part of a land trust that wanted to preserve green space." Harland raised an eyebrow. Langford's on the board of Langford Kestrel Development. They don't preserve anything. They build luxury estates and artificial lakes. That tracks, I said. He practically drooled when he saw the creek. Harlan jotted something into his notebook. He's also a known donor to Pine Heights HOA's capital fund. If he's tied to this, it's going deeper than just code violations. Ramon stepped in. Langford's name came up last week when we pulled the HOA's recent expenditures. They paid his firm $25,000 for a land use feasibility report. I leaned against the kitchen counter. So this has nothing to do with chickens or fences. They're trying to force me out to prep the land for sale. Exactly, Harlan said, and they're doing it under the pretense of enforcement. By that evening, I'd installed motion sensors along the fence line and set the barn cameras to live stream straight to a secure cloud account. Just after midnight, the alarm app on my phone buzzed. I was out of bed and at the window in seconds. A lone figure in a dark hoodie crept across the back pasture, crouched near the goat pen, and reached for the latch. Before he could open it, 2 floodlights snapped on and a recorded message from my speakers blared. "You are trespassing on private property. Law enforcement has been notified." The man bolted. I caught a clear frame of his face as he turned toward the camera, young, no older than 25, sharp jawline, and a tattoo behind his ear. I forwarded the footage to Harlan before the adrenaline even wore off. The next morning, he called me back. Name's Jared Reeves. Works part-time security for Langford's firm. No criminal record, but he's been flagged in 2 other property disputes, both involving aggressive eviction tactics. I exhaled slowly. They're escalating. Harlan didn't disagree. We're going to need a warrant. Later that week, the sheriff's office executed a search at the Pine Heights HOA office, a converted bungalow at the front of the neighborhood with tinted windows and a keypad entry. They confiscated hard drives, financial records, and 3 of those fake metal badges. Francine showed up during the search, all pearls and fury. "You can't do this," she shouted at the deputies. "This is private property. You're violating our rights." Deputy Carla Hines met her at the steps. "We've got a warrant, Francine." "You're the one who's been violating rights." Inside, they found something that changed everything. A sealed folder labeled Priority Acquisitions. Inside were maps, aerial photos, and detailed notes on a dozen properties, including mine. Each had a timeline, projected valuations, and coded references to phase conversion. Harlan called me the moment they opened it. "They weren't just targeting you," he said. "They had a whole list of people with land they wanted, and a multi-step plan to drive them out." Francine was arrested on site for obstruction and impersonation of a public official. But the real hammer came down when the DA opened a criminal conspiracy investigation into the HOA's financials. Turns out, those so-called code enforcement actions were being funded by off-the-books donations from Langford's company, funneled through a sham maintenance vendor. I attended the emergency HOA meeting the following week not as a member, but as a witness. They held it at the community hall, packed with residents who'd seen the news and were now demanding answers. Langford tried to play it cool, standing at the podium in a crisp blazer like he was giving a TED talk. "We acted in good faith," he said. "Our goal was to improve community standards." I raised my hand. "Is that why you hired a security contractor to break into my livestock pen at midnight?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Langford's jaw tensed. "That's an unsubstantiated accusation." Harlan stepped forward from the back of the room. "We have surveillance footage, time-stamped and verified. The individual has confessed to being paid a cash bonus for scaring the farm guy straight." Langford turned pale. A woman named Darlene, who ran the neighborhood's quilting club, stood up with a binder in hand. "I just reviewed the HOA's financials," she said. "You authorized $27,000 in landscaping assessments that never actually happened. Where did the money go?" Langford didn't answer. "He didn't get the chance. The sheriff's office served him a subpoena right there in front of everyone. The board voted to suspend all enforcement actions indefinitely. A forensic audit was ordered. And 3 days later, a judge granted a temporary injunction blocking the HOA from collecting dues until the investigation was complete. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to be left alone to raise goats, fix fences, and keep my family's land intact. But sometimes, the only way to stop a bully is to drag them into the daylight and let the truth burn through their lies. The following week, a group of neighbors came by with coffee, fresh bread, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Jericho's Farm Community Stronghold." We mounted it on the front gate the same day, not as a trophy, but as a warning. The next time someone tries to turn this land into a cash grab, they'll know exactly who they're up against. 3 weeks after the raid, the courtroom smelled like stale carpet and cold coffee. The kind of place where bad decisions got dissected under fluorescent lights. I sat behind the state's table, not as a plaintiff, not as a defendant, but as a witness whose farm had become ground zero in a suburban land grab. The courtroom was packed. Not just with residents from Pine Heights, but with people from nearby towns who'd seen the news and wanted to know if anyone would finally be held accountable. The air buzzed with quiet tension, murmurs rolling through the pews like wind before a storm. Judge Bramwell, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and the patience of a coiled spring, adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the defense table. "Mr. Langford, you are facing charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of a public official, and unlawful surveillance. Do you understand the severity of these?" Langford, looking far less polished in a wrinkled suit than he had at the HOA meetings, gave a tight nod. His lawyer, some overpaid guy from a downtown firm, leaned in and whispered something, but Langford didn't respond. He just stared ahead, jaw clenched. The prosecution wasted no time. They brought up the surveillance footage of Langford's contractor trespassing on my land, the falsified HOA maintenance invoices, and the priority acquisitions folder that had all but spelled out the scheme. When it was my turn on the stand, the room went dead silent. "Mr. Mays," the prosecutor began, "can you describe how you first became aware you were being targeted?" "They sent a fake inspection team to my farm," I said. "Claimed I was in violation of codes that don't exist. They entered my barn without permission, took photos, and tried to intimidate me into compliance." "And did you have documentation to refute their claims?" I nodded. "Every inch of my property is grandfathered in under county zoning, and I had surveillance footage of the entire encounter, including them entering without consent." The defense attorney tried to rattle me. "Mr. Mays, isn't it true you have a history of refusing to cooperate with the HOA?" "I refused to let them rewrite the law to suit their ambitions," I said. "That's not noncompliance. That's knowing my rights." He tried to pivot. "And yet you called a county inspector during their visit. Why? To ensure someone with actual jurisdiction was present. Turned out that was the smartest move I made. There were no further questions." After I stepped down, the prosecution called up Deputy Harland. He laid out a timeline of Langford's transactions, how money moved from the HOA's discretionary fund into a shell company, then into Langford's firm under the guise of consulting. Not a single invoice matched the so-called services provided, but the bombshell came when they played an audio recording. It had been recovered from Langford's assistant's computer. A conversation between Langford and Francine, recorded 2 months before the raid. Francine's voice, "Jericho's the tipping point. If we can get him to fold, the rest will follow, Langford. Then push harder. Fake a compliance breach. If he fights, send someone to scare him into silence, just enough to make him rethink staying." The room erupted. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order," Langford's attorney stood, pale and stiff. "Your Honor, we were unaware of this recording's existence before today. We request a recess." "Request denied," Bramwell said coolly. "You had ample time for discovery. Proceed." By the end of the week, Francine pled guilty. She cut a deal in exchange for her testimony against Langford. The court stripped her of her HOA role permanently. She was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation and 200 hours of community service, half of which would be spent assisting elderly residents with property upkeep under supervision. Langford wasn't as lucky. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Conspiracy, fraud, coercion. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison with no chance of parole for the first 3. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. You used fear, manipulation, and deception to exploit community trust for personal gain. That's not business. That's criminal predation. After the verdict, things changed fast. The new interim HOA president, a retired judge named Alina Petrov, held an open forum in the community hall. She stood behind the same podium Langford had used, only this time there were no cameras, no rehearsed speeches, just a stack of handwritten notes and a tired smile. "We're dismantling the enforcement committee," she said. "Effective immediately. No more golf cart patrols. No more citations without clear evidence and county corroboration. And we're returning all fines collected over the last 12 months pending audit verification." You could hear the collective exhale from the crowd. I stood in the back, arms crossed. Nolan was next to me, chewing a toothpick like it owed him money. "You think they'll keep their word?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Alina's not Langford. She's got more integrity than the last 5 presidents combined." He spat the toothpick into a cup and grunted. "Still. Keep the cameras up. Always." In the weeks that followed, life on the farm returned to its rhythm. The goats were calm again, the chickens stopped flinching at shadows, and the neighbors who used to avoid me now waved as they drove by. Jasmine even brought her daycare kids out for an afternoon to pet the animals, something she said she'd been too nervous to do before. Then came the letter from the county. It wasn't a citation. It wasn't a warning. It was a proposal. The Board of Supervisors wanted to designate my land as a community heritage site protected from future development, eligible for agricultural grants and permanently outside HOA enforcement. I signed it that afternoon. The plaque went up a month later. May's Heritage Farm, established 1952, preserved by community action. At the unveiling, Alina approached me. "You know," she said, "this place was almost erased." "Yeah," I said, looking out over the pasture. "But it wasn't." She hesitated. "We'd like you to consider joining the new advisory council. Help keep this from happening again." I didn't answer right away. "I'm not a politician," I said. "No," she replied. "You're something better. You care." I agreed on one condition: that every meeting be open to the public, recorded and posted online. No more closed doors, no more hidden agendas. She agreed without hesitation. By the end of the year, Pine Heights had rewritten its charter. Gone were the secret citations, the fake enforcers, and the land grab games. In their place stood a community council with actual transparency, a resident-run maintenance committee, and for the first time, an annual budget review that involved the whole neighborhood. The fake badges were melted down and turned into a sculpture that now sits in front of the community center, a twisted metal reminder of how close they came to losing everything. And me, I still get up at dawn, still fix fences, still feed the goats. But sometimes, when I walk the fence line with the morning mist hugging the ground and the sun just starting to rise, I catch sight of that plaque and remember what it took to keep it all standing. Not just surveillance or legal filings, but backbone. And a community that finally decided enough was enough.